After reclassifying to 2026, where might 6'9" superstar and Kevin Durant clone Baba Oladotun end up playing college hoops?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, longtime college basketball podcaster, Andy Patton. You're joining here at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. I want to thank all of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Give a special shout out to those everyday listeners and those of you hanging out with us in the Locked On College Basketball Discord community. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Folks, download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you will get $20 off your first purchase. Handful of different topics to get to today. Utah's first non-conference schedule under head coach Alex Jensen is out. We're going to talk about this grouping of teams, what it means for Coach Jensen and the Utes in their second season in the Big 12. We also talk about 4 players who are transferring, not just down transfers from power conferences to mid-major schools, but specifically 4 players who are transferring from the SEC to mid-major programs and how we think that might impact them coming from one of, if not the strongest conference in the history of college basketball last year. We're going to get to both those topics later in the show, but we are opening today with the news that came out late last week. Baba Oladotun has reclassified to the 2026 class. For those of you who are maybe not super plugged into recruiting news, Oladotun was the top-ranked player in the 2027 recruiting class, the rising junior class. And it's not a surprise to see him make this decision, but he will instead reclassify to 2026, meaning he will graduate a year early and start his college basketball career in the year that he would normally be a high school senior. Again, this has become fairly common. It's never really been super rare. Typically, you'll see a handful of players do this, maybe not every year, but it's not uncommon for the top-ranked players to reclassify. Cooper Flagg did it. AJ Dibansa did it. So he's joining BYU this year in what would normally be his senior season of high school. Cooper Flagg would normally be starting his freshman year of college right now. Instead, he, of course, will be with the Dallas Mavericks after a tremendous freshman year last year. And so while this isn't super uncommon, it's probably going to become more common. And I think before we get into the specifics of Oladotun and what it means for him, I think that's a big kind of part of this conversation is in the NIL era, where student athletes have the ability to immediately make huge amounts of money as college freshmen. Sure feels like the incentive to graduate high school early and start your college career is there in a way that it's never been in the past. In the past, sure, there'd be the incentive to get to the NBA quicker. You can't, for the last 20-ish plus years, you haven't been able to go directly to the NBA from high school. So graduating early, starting your college journey early so that you can get to the NBA early certainly made some sense. But now that incentive is not just for those guys who want to be one and dones and straight to the NBA, but it's there for anybody who thinks they can earn significant amounts of money playing college basketball. Now, granted, the number of players who can earn real money, like life-changing amounts of money in college basketball, are probably also the same players who are likely trying to get into the NBA as one and done players like Dibansa, like Flagg before him. But it's still something that I wonder if we will start to see more of, even in the house settlement era where those numbers are capped a little bit more. I mean, Flagg earned a ton of money last year. Dibansa's going to earn a ton of money this year. And while Oladotun's, overall earning potential may be a little bit lower, he's still going to make himself a whole boatload of money. Those top-ranked recruits in any class going forward are still going to be commanding millions, if not at least hundreds of thousands of dollars in NIL funds, either directly from the school or in third-party NIL deals. So, yeah, I think we're going to see this continue to become a trend. And it's a smart move for Oladotun, not just because of his talent, but because the 2026 class is considered pretty weak, and his ability to push his way into the lottery of the 2027 NBA draft, as opposed to having to wait for the 2028 NBA draft, is definitely there. There's really only one kind of player who's kind of jumped at that consensus top spot in the 2026 class, and that's Tyron Stokes. Tyron Stokes and Baba Oladotun could not be more different in their at least appearance as players. Stokes is a 6'7", 245-pound monster wing who's being pursued by Kentucky, Louisville, Gonzaga, Oregon, a handful of others who played for that Team USA U19 team this summer, whereas Oladotun is 6'9" and like 175, 180 pounds, literally a couple inches taller, but 100 pounds less than Tyron Stokes. He is a stick. Oladotun, coming over from the 2027 class where he was the number 1 ranked player, has slotted in at number 8 in the 2026 class, according to 247 Sports. On3/Rivals has slotted him in at number 6 in their recruiting rankings. So he's not quite at the same level, in part because his age and skinniness in particular kind of make him, he's played up throughout his career at this point, but playing up at the collegiate level is going to be a bit tough for him. He's still got a year to fill out and gain some more muscle, and he did gain 20 pounds this last year. So if he can put on another 15 or 20 without losing that athleticism, man, the skill set, the talent is absolutely there with Oladotun. He's a 6'9" forward from Silver Spring, Maryland. He's got a 6'11" wingspan, a 9-foot standing reach, and he's just a very gifted, fluid athlete and scorer. His offensive versatility is top notch. I made the Kevin Durant kind of comment, a little tongue in cheek in the cold open, but stylistically, he does look like Kevin Durant. He's 6'9". He moves very fluidly. He's a guard in a wing/forwards body. He's developed as a passer. He's a good scorer in the mid-range. He's a good outside shooter. Obviously, he needs to get a lot stronger. A great article written up by, I believe, Eric Bossi at 247 Sports described him as, quote, a few cheeseburgers away from being considered skinny, which I love that quote because, yeah, he's not even skinny. He is like whatever is less than skinny at this point, but the talent is undeniable. The frame and skill set of Kevin Durant, again, the upside is probably not there, mostly because Kevin Durant's one of the greatest players to ever play the game of basketball, but Oladotun being in that mold at least makes him incredibly appealing, and at this point, he has played extremely well at every single stop. So there's no real reason to believe that won't continue. The question becomes, where will that continue at? He's going to stay at his high school in Maryland for right now, but where is he going to go for the 26-27 season? He has offers from basically everybody. There's not, I mean, at this point, if it's a top caliber program, they have probably contacted Oladotun, have probably made him an offer. Some notable ones: Maryland, Kansas, Kentucky, BYU, Arkansas, Indiana, Louisville, Michigan, Oregon, Gonzaga, Texas, UCLA, USC, Villanova, Tennessee, Syracuse, etc., etc., etc. He's planning to visit Maryland, his hometown team, in September. He's also planning to visit Virginia Tech, which is his father's alma mater. Don't think he's going to end up at Virginia Tech, but hey, you never know. I didn't think Nico Abdalas would end up there either, and he did. This would be quite a haul for Coach Mike White at Virginia Tech, But yeah, I think Maryland does seem plausible for him to stay home. Maybe Buzz Williams can make a big old splash in the recruiting trail there. Oladotun has also unofficially visited USC and UCLA. But this quote from his father, Ibrahim Oladotun, the one who played at Virginia Tech, is, I think, a little bit telling in terms of what they're looking for. This quote was told to Paul Biancardi of ESPN. Quote, "We are looking for a coach that has a long history of teaching and winning, someone who knows how to use a big guard and has a history of coaching big guards, a coach that also plays an NBA-style offense with quick actions." So how many programs in college basketball fit long history of teaching and winning, knowing how to coach a big guard, and has an NBA-style offense? There's not that many out there that I think can really comfortably check every box. The one that stood out to me is Arkansas. And you can quibble about John Calipari's history of winning. He's won a championship. He has a history of winning. The recent history in winning is a bit more questionable, but John Calipari, history of teaching, history of winning, knows how to use a big guard. I think that's a big success for Coach Calipari. A lot of the guards he has had on his roster are bigger guards, and I think he has proven capable of doing that. I think NBA-style offense is probably the other one that it's not there for Coach Cal, but because of the track record of successful players going into the NBA from Calipari's system, I think that could give them a little bit of an advantage here. Most of the other programs seem like they're short somewhere. Gonzaga has a long history of winning. Obviously, part of that has been the quality of competition they've faced, but they have that long history. They play an NBA style offense. They have quick actions. I think the debatable question there is whether they have a history of coaching big guards. They haven't really recruited a lot of big guards, so I feel like they're kind of lacking in that spot. But reportedly, Oladotun is considering a visit to Gonzaga, so they're going to make their push and make their swing to see if they can get him out to Spokane. They've landed the top-ranked recruit before in Chet Holmgren. Jalen Suggs is a 5-star, so it's not out of the question for them. There are a couple other programs like Kentucky. Mark Pope's a winning coach. They have an NBA style. They've had big guards, kind of, but it doesn't have a long history of winning. I think Kentucky as a program has a rich history. Mark Pope, not as much. Kansas has a long history of winning. They've had some NBA bigger guards, do not really play an NBA style. Maryland, Buzz has a winning history. Maryland's been a little questionable, but it's not an NBA style. BYU has an NBA style. They have AJ Dibansa coming in as a big guard, but there's not a lot of history there either. Louisville plays in an NBA style, not a lot of history, not a lot of big guards in Pat Kelsey's history. So and again, there's obviously many other programs on this list, but I'm very interested in Oladotun's recruitment. He's a very fun player. He's a very talented player. He's not quite the same as Dibansa, but a 6'9" guard in a lot of ways. There are some similarities. So I will be interested to see what ends up happening with Oladotun, especially now that he's going to be playing up a level after he graduates a year early to start college basketball in the 26-27 season. Well, folks, the SEC was the toughest basketball conference of all time last year. So anybody who's transferring from that league to a mid-major program should or could be primed for a major breakout this season. We're going to discuss 4 such players coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, we've all been there, logging on early and waiting forever and ever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show that you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with all the stress that is modern ticket shopping. And that's where Gametime comes in. Gametime makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. And if you're worried about what happens if your plans change, you don't have to be, because the Gametime guarantee has your back with cancellation protection and more. Since we're talking about Maryland, I thought we'd talk about some shows coming up at the CFG Bank Arena in Baltimore. And my co-host, the great Isaac Shades, I know he saw Nate Bargatze, the comedian, last year. He said it was a great show. Folks, if you're interested, you can get tickets on Thursday, August 21st at the CFG Bank Arena in Baltimore for just $65. And that's in section 116. That's down there on the floor level. So folks, take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets and sporting event tickets by using Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Download the Gametime app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On College Basketball Podcast, and we're switching away from our conversation about Baba Oladotun, the top-ranked recruit in the 2027 class, who has now reclassified to 2026. Talk about where he might end up playing college hoops. And now we want to talk, it's sort of a continuation of the conversations that Isaac and I have had the last few weeks, where we've been talking about sophomore breakouts and junior breakouts and senior breakouts, to instead talk about down transfers. And we've done this before, where we talk about the best players who are transferring from the Power 4 conferences to the mid-major ranks and kind of who we think might break out and have a big season. But I wanted to get even more granular, even more specific, and talk about players who are transferring from the SEC, which, as we've talked about extensively on the show, was one of, if not the most dominant conference in college basketball history last year. 14 of their 16 teams ended up in the NCAA tournament. Just a tremendously successful conference top to bottom. And anybody who made it through that conference schedule, who had any level of productivity, should, in theory, be able to have sustained success elsewhere. Now, obviously, there are a ton of factors. Maybe your SEC school was a better fit for you stylistically. Maybe you're going to be in a situation where you and the coach don't get along as well. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean you're automatically going to succeed. But wanted to pick on 4 transfers in particular who I think, hey, this could really work, and you could really see this player have a breakout type season. And I'll mention two at first who I'm not going to talk about because we talked about them as part of our breakout candidate series. So that would be Damian Collins, who's transferring from LSU to South Florida. We talked about Collins a lot because he was highly productive at LSU, was at Kentucky previously, and I think it's going to be a great get for South Florida. We also, I think for South Florida, they are a mid-major in the American Athletic Conference, but they're a high-level mid-major. So too is VCU, which is where Tyrell Ward, also leaving LSU, is transferring to. I know my co-host Isaac talked a lot about him in one of those breakout series episodes. So I'm not talking Collins or Ward, but I am talking about four other transfers, including one who is transferring from LSU, by the way. So we will talk about him in a second. But we're first going to start by talking about Zachary Davis. Zachary Davis transferring from South Carolina to Memphis, joining Penny Hardaway and the Tigers. Davis is a 6'8" wing who spent 3 seasons at South Carolina with Coach Lamont Paris. Last year, he had the best season of his career, averaged about 8 points, 4.5 boards, 2 assists, and 1 steal per game. Not a very efficient scorer, however, 46.5% on twos, just 27.5% from three on about 3 attempts per game. But now he gets to go to a Memphis program that needed to replace so much production from last year. They lose PJ Haggerty in the transfer portal. They also see graduations for Dane Danger, Tyrese Hunter, Colby Rogers, Nick Jourdain, all out the door. Most of Memphis's leading scorers are gone from last year, so they're going to have a lot of different players coming in to try to pick up the pieces. They get Doug McDaniel coming in from Kansas State, but Zachary Davis is a guy that his size, his length on the perimeter, 3 years of experience in the SEC. Again, he's not much of a three-point shooter, but considering the amount of talent that Memphis needs to replicate, anytime you can get a 6'8" wing with his level of experience and scoring acumen, I think you feel pretty darn good about that. And Davis is not the only player transferring to Memphis that we're going to talk about. I mentioned that we're talking about another LSU transfer. That would be Curtis Givens. Givens transferring from LSU to Memphis after spending his freshman season with the Tigers. Givens is a 6'3" guard who's from Memphis, so this is a homecoming for him. After 1 year down in Baton Rouge, he decided he wanted to go back home to go play for the Tigers. Givens was a 4-star recruit coming out of high school. He was the 84th ranked prospect in the 2024 class at 247 Sports. So this is a really nice get for Penny Hardaway's team. He was also decently productive last year for the Tigers, averaged about 5 points and a little under 2 rebounds and 1.5 assists per game. Played about 18 minutes as a freshman, again, at LSU. But also, like we mentioned with Davis, Givens not much of a three-point shooter. Took nearly 4 three-point attempts per game, so he is a willing three-point shooter, but he knocked them down just under 25% of the time. So you got a pair of SEC transfers coming in for Coach Penny Hardaway at Memphis, 2 guards who have experience, who played in the SEC last year, but neither of them knocked down much of those outside shots. If one of these guys can find that outside shot and become more of a floor spacing wing, I think that's going to be a huge advantage for Penny Hardaway's team. But these are the kind of players that Penny likes, these super athletic, high-level wings who can do multiple different things, who can get downhill, who are big, who are physical and strong. Like, this is the kind of player that Coach Hardaway has gone after. So it's not a surprise to see these 2 guys end up at Memphis, but it is something where you can have as many drivers and guys who love to get to the cup as you want, but if you don't have anybody who can space the floor, especially in the modern college game, it's just not going to do you any good. You can ask some of those late, the final few years of Eric Musselman's tenure at Arkansas. You can ask those teams what that means, because they had some great players on those rosters, but they really struggled to do some of the things that we knew they wanted to do because they just could not get space because of the floor spacing limitations of those rosters. So we'll see if there's players on Memphis's team who will step up and knock down those outside shots, but I wouldn't be surprised to see both Davis and Givens have quality seasons after transferring from the SEC over to that Tigers club. Next guy I want to talk about is MJ Collins. MJ Collins transferring from Vanderbilt to Utah State in the Mountain West Conference. Collins, a 6'3" guard. He actually spent 2 years at Virginia Tech before spending last year at Vanderbilt. Last year, he averaged 7.5 points, 2.5 boards, and a 1/2 of an assist in about 20 minutes per game. Was pretty effective as a 2-point scorer, about 53%, which again, for a 6'3" guard in the SEC, I'll take 53% on 2-pointers, but also struggled from beyond the arc, just under 30% from 3 on about 3 attempts per game. While he was not a passer at all at Vanderbilt, like I said, 0.5 assists per game last year, in his final season at Virginia Tech, Collins did average just under 3 assists per game and only 1.2 turnovers. So he is a player who has experience handling the ball and being more of a facilitator, did that in the ACC, so could probably do that in the Mountain West for this Utah State club. And that's a good thing for these Aggies, because they have a lot of guard depth to replace. They lose Dayton Albury, who transfers to New Mexico, also lose Ian Martinez and Dexter Akano to graduation. Those are the 3 best guards from last year's roster, all out the door. And while Utah State does get Colby King coming over from Butler and Gary Clark from Texas A&M Corpus Christi, this team needs some guard talent, and MJ Collins is going to be expected to play a big role for the Aggies in their final season in the Mountain West before they join the new look Pac-12 in 26-27. Last player to talk about here is a guy that's not getting a ton of attention, but could be a really big-time addition for the Dayton Flyers, and that's Deshane Montgomery. Montgomery transferring from Georgia to Dayton, 6'4" guard who spent his freshman year at Mount St. Mary's before transferring to Georgia. At Mount St. Mary's, he averaged about 13 points, 3.5 boards, 2 assists, and just under 2 steals per game. He was incredibly efficient, about 58% on 2-pointers and 41% from 3. He was the MAC Rookie of the Year, one of the best players at the mid-major level, which is why he transferred up to Georgia. But then some eligibility concerns just from the transfer eligibility ended up costing him the first part of the season. He only ended up playing 17 games for the Bulldogs, averaged about 15.5 minutes, 6.5 points, 2 boards, and 1 steal. Efficiency plummeted. Again, not a huge shock. Went from 57.7% on 2s to 47.7%, and his 3-point shot dropped from 41 to 25% last year, albeit on a small volume. So for Montgomery, the question is kind of, does he look more like that somewhat inefficient, shot chucker at Georgia, or is he more like the guy who was incredibly efficient as a freshman at Mount St. Mary's? Now he's transferring to Dayton, which is kind of right in the middle. Georgia's not a great program. I think Dayton is a better program, but coming from the SEC to the A10 is a drop in quality, but certainly a higher quality conference than the MAC as well. So I think that'll be the interesting question. Anthony Grant's going to start him, I think. I'm assuming health, assuming eligibility concerns are all put to rest. I think Montgomery's going to start for this Dayton team. It's got some serious holes to fill with some losses as well, including Malachi Smith transferring to Dayton. So I'm really interested to see what Montgomery can do. I think he's a guy that, because Georgia didn't get a lot of press last year, because he only played half the season, and because his lone successful season was at a school that does not get a lot of attention in Mount St. Mary's, Deshane Montgomery is very much flying under the radar. But I think he could be a really nice addition for Dayton, and frankly could end up being a guy who is A10 first team, or A10 second team, or truly helping this team contend to win that conference and get themselves back in the NCAA tournament. Fun stuff there, folks. We'll take a look at doing some more of these down transfer conversations as well. Always fun players to track year in and year out. But we're actually going to close out the show moving over to the Big 12 and talking about Utah's new head coach, Alex Jensen, because his first non-conference schedule as a head coach was revealed on Monday. Fun group of teams here, a handful of matchups that should challenge this Utes club in their second season in the Big 12. We'll get to that coming up in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still locked on college basketball, and we are closing out the show talking about the non-conference schedule reveal for the Utah Utes team. We haven't talked a ton about this offseason, but they have a new coach. They were decently successful in their first year in the Big 12, very new look roster, so good opportunity to kind of talk a little bit about where this team is at. Before we get into that, though, I want to talk about this non-conference schedule specifically. We're going to rattle it off here. They start with a pair of exhibition games. Their first one will be at home against Nevada, the Wolfpack, on October 17th, and then they will take on Oregon in Eugene on October 24th. Then they start the season officially on November 3rd at home against San Jose State. A lot of home games early on. They'll take on Weber State on the 8th, Holy Cross on the 10th, Sam Houston State on the 15th, and then Purdue Fort Wayne on the 18th, and then Cal Poly on the 20th. So a lot of home games in the month of November, all against mid-major teams, but some quality mid-major teams. And your San Jose State was good last year in the Mountain West. Cal Poly had a successful season in the Big West, and Holy Cross and Purdue Fort Wayne are decent teams as well. Then they're going to be in Palm Desert, California as part of the Acrisure Invitational. They'll take on Grand Canyon in their first game on November 25th. Again, a very quality mid-major program. And depending how they do in that game, they will take on either Iowa or Ole Miss on November 26th. So they will get a Power 4 conference opponent, either a Big Ten or SEC team in Iowa and Ole Miss in that second game. Then after that, they go on their first road trip of the season, December 2nd. They will head out to Old Foe Cal to go take on the Golden Bears in Berkeley. Then they return home to take on Cal Baptist on December 6th. Week after that, they'll play another SEC team in Mississippi State. This is a neutral site game, although it is at the Delta Center in Salt Lake. So more of a road game for Mississippi State than anything else, but still technically a neutral site for the Utes. Then they come back home and play Eastern Washington December 20th, and then they close out the non-conference slate with another road game, this time going out to Seattle to take on the Washington Huskies. So a couple thoughts about this schedule here. Nice to see some old Pac-12 games, right? Like you get Oregon on the road, you get Cal on the road, you get Washington on the road. Now, the Oregon game is an exhibition game, but other than that, the 3 times that Utah travels to a road venue are teams that they used to play in the Pac-12. Eugene, Berkeley, and Seattle for Washington. So that's always fun to see those games. Always happy to see those teams playing each other again. There's not a lot of super challenging games on this schedule outside of that. Like I said, I think Grand Canyon and then whoever they play between Iowa and Ole Miss will be solid. Mississippi State's a team I'm not really sure how to feel about them yet, but they should be. They should certainly, I think, will be favored to beat this Utah team just by virtue of being an SEC team, even if they are on a pseudo road environment playing in Salt Lake. But I like the schedule because I feel like it's a pretty appropriate schedule for a program in the spot that Utah's in. They have a new head coach coming in who has not coached at this level. That does not mean that there's going to be a long learning curve. Kevin Young had not coached at this level either when he took over at BYU, and they were excellent last year and now have a ton of money and are bankrolled and are seemingly going to be a legitimate contender going forward. We'll see what Luke Locks is able to do at Florida State, but that's another attempt by a program to bring in a coach with NBA experience and not a lot of college experience, with the hopes that that will be able to work. I think between Jensen and Laux, we'll get a good sense of how much is Kevin Young truly an anomaly with the success he's had at BYU, or is that more the norm going forward? A little bit about Alex Jensen for those who maybe haven't heard a lot of conversation about the new Utah coach. He played at Utah in 94-95, then took a couple of years off to go on a mission and then came back, played for them for 3 more years from 1997 to 2000, was on that 1998 Utah team that went to the national championship and lost to Kentucky. He then played professionally for a while, had some coaching gigs before settling with the Utah Jazz as an assistant coach in 2013. He was there for a decade till 2023 and then was with the Mavericks for the last couple of years. Utah has lost 11 players to the transfer portal in Jensen's first year, including Mike Sheriff-Jomps, who transferred to South Carolina, Miro Little, who transferred to UC Santa Barbara, Ezra Asar, who transferred to USC. Those are some of the biggest losses for Utah, but they bring in quite a few talented players. A transfer portal class that I'm cautiously optimistic about. They bring in Babacar Faye from Western Kentucky, one of 2 transfers from Western Kentucky joining this team. Ja'Kai Howard comes over from Auburn. Elijah Moore comes over from Syracuse. He was pretty highly regarded coming out of high school. They got a junior college guard from Salt Lake Community College in Alvin Jackson. So some fun. There's more than just those guys, but those are kind of some of the highlights for this Utah team. And I'm really interested to see Jensen bringing an NBA style, kind of bringing a new look to this Utah team. It feels like the Utes really had their heart set on Jensen because they fired Coach Craig Smith after what was not that bad of a year. Utah went 16-17 last year, so not great. Obviously, you finish under 500. You don't feel great about that. But Utah went 8-12 in the Big 12. That was a really darn good Big 12 last year. And I apologize that Bobby Hurley is going to catch some strays here, but they went a lot worse than 8-12, and Bobby Hurley still got his job over at Arizona State. So Craig Smith, after a successful run at Utah State, getting poached by Utah, he had a 20-win season 2 years ago. Last year, it took a little bit of a dip, but it was a bit of a surprise to see Utah move on from Coach Smith, who wasn't there that long, who didn't seemingly have, wasn't trending in the wrong direction necessarily. I was a little surprised by that, but I think Utah really had their heart set on Jensen, maybe felt like, hey, if we don't hire him now, we may miss the opportunity. I mean, he's been a minor or a NBA assistant coach for over a decade. So at that point, he's probably chomping at the bit to get himself a head coaching job. But yeah, I'm interested to see what this looks like. I wouldn't be shocked if Utah isn't much better. 8-12 last year. I mean, obviously there's only 18 Big 12 games this year, but do you shoot for 8-10? 8-10 would be great. 9-9. Obviously, if you go 500 in conference play, I think you feel really good about that. Utah has a nice home court advantage in some ways just by virtue of playing at elevation, which I know is a challenge for a lot of Big 12 teams last year. But guess what? They're going to be a little bit more ready for it this year too. So I'm curious how that will end up playing out for both Utah and BYU on that matter. So Utes are a team I'm intrigued by this year. Interested to see how the pieces come together. Interested to see how another NBA assistant coach joining a Big 12 program in the state of Utah does. Going to be hard to replicate the same success that Kevin Young had at BYU, but I don't think Jensen needs to do that for this to be considered a successful first season for Utah basketball under his tutelage. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. I'll be back with you all on Wednesday morning, along with the great Leaf Tulane. Got a team preview for this upcoming season lined up for you all as well. Isaac's got a fun interview for you on Thursday. Speaking of the A10, he's interviewing a player from that conference. And then he and I will be back with you all on Friday to close out the week. Thanks again, folks. Have a fantastic rest of your day. As always, we want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wild Popes. Cheers to the McBruins. And until Wednesday, peace out.